Hi, my name is Brock Lutz, and welcome to the breakout session entitled Guarding Youth from the Lasting Effects of Exposure to Pornography. Quick introduction. Currently, I serve as the Director of Health and Wellness at Hillsdale College in Michigan. So I oversee our counseling services on campus and also our various medical services. To give you a little bit of background, I did abstinence education back in the early 2000s. I don't think that that's what it's referred to anymore. Been out of that world for 10 or 15 years. So did that initially as a teacher, and then while I was in graduate school, or while I was doing that, returned to school, got a graduate degree in counseling, and have served in several different capacities in counseling. First, working with sex offenders and in an outpatient setting, most of whom were either on probation or parole and mandated to meet with us. Then have done a lot of work in private practice settings, both with mental health issues as well as substance issues. Sexual addiction is always something that I find myself working with and kind of drawn to. Obviously, a big deal culturally, and maybe I'll share some of those stories as I walk through things today. My last stop before Hillsdale, I was a clinical director at a psychiatric hospital on the east side of Cleveland, and then started at Hillsdale, which is my alma mater, in fall of 2011. So there's so many different ways to talk about pornography, and as I really sat down to think about things that I wanted to share today, what I didn't want to do is do what I think is maybe pretty easy to do, which is just throw a bunch of facts at you. I will include some facts, and I think it's important to know some of those things. Because really things are so widespread with pornography. But I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach when I spoke with Marian Mozak about this breakout session. One of the things she said was, we want to make these interesting, and we want to make them applicable. And so I thought of maybe just looking at it from a little bit of a different approach than maybe we typically do, and hope that it's interesting and useful for you. At Hillsdale, one of the things we talk a lot about is we talk a lot about classical learning, and specifically Greco-Roman thought. We talk a lot about Aristotle, and Aristotle said a lot of really wonderful things. One of the things he talked a lot about is this idea of the good. And by that, he doesn't mean something's bad or good or excellent. Instead, what he means is that we, with everything that we encounter in life, we have to be able to struggle with the goodness of that thing. So it's very important for us to be able to identify things like, what is good art, or what is good music, or what is a good book, or what is a good person, and that descriptor, that adjective, is an important one to struggle with, because we throw that word around quite a bit. And so, but what he meant by the good wasn't just something that was entertaining or pleasing to the eye or the ear in some way. What Aristotle said is that the goodness of a thing, whether something actually is a good book or a good piece of music, or a good person, is always tied up in the essence of that thing. One of the analogies that Dr. Arnn likes to use here at Hillsdale is the idea of a water bottle. And first of all, if you hold up water bottles, they're quite easy to identify, and you know one when you see it, because we have a schema in our mind of, oh, that's a water bottle, and some of them are made out of cheap plastic, and some of them are made and quite intricately out of metal, and you can turn it upside down and it won't spill, and but they're all a water bottle, and 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 so if we then start to talk about what a good water bottle is, we have to then get at the definition of what a water bottle is supposed to do. So we get at something's purpose, or we get at the essence of something. And so a good water bottle holds water, and it maybe keeps water cold, and we start to develop an idea of what that means and what that looks like. Well, this is so important when we start talking about people, and it's so significant for us to be able to define ultimately goodness related to people and the things that we do and the purposes that we live by. So it's very easy to take a look at pornography and talk about its negatives, and there are obviously lots of reasons and ways that we can do that. But to me, what I think is an important place to start is, instead of talking about these are all the different ways that pornography erodes or negatively affects a person, it's important to be able to first look and say, well, what is a person in the first place? And maybe to even look and to say, well, what is a good person? A person that we would look and we would say, this is what a person is supposed to be. That, I think, is the place to start, because then if we talk about how pornography starts to erode that, or is antithetical to a person actually becoming like that, well, I think then we have a stronger argument. But what we also do is, we're not just talking about how pornography comes against people and comes against forming them into people, or the dangers and toxicity of the impact. But what it also does is we want to give people a vision of what the goodness of our personages is. We want to be able to say, the reason why we don't want you to do this is because this is actually the kind of person we want you to become. And this is the vision. Okay, this is very easy to create, the negative piece, but it's a stronger argument if actually what we start with is, as an individual, this is how you were designed. And if you're going to be a good person, we're in the middle of commencement. We just had commencement a couple days ago, and something really cool kind of happened this year. I always stand up in front of, we always put all the freshman males together, and we kind of give them these different rah-rah speeches from maybe 8 or 9 of the men on campus who are in student affairs. And I always tell them, I say, commencement is this is potentially like the saddest and happiest day of the year. And it's not just sad because we say goodbye to people that we've formed these relationships with, though that is part of it. But it's happy because we're launching them, and we see people that have really done well and really grown. But I tell them, I said, every year there's someone who doesn't leave here very strongly. And what happens is they kind of limp across the stage. And they're a shadow of the person that they could have been in those 4 years. Maybe they started strong, but boy, they didn't finish strong. And I always say, I don't want you to limp out of here. I want you actually to be someone who who walks confidently but humbly across the stage, and you've grown and you've developed, and that's what we want. I had 3 young men on this past commencement come up to me, and they said, "Hey, we just want to let you know, I'm not limping out of here." And I thought, boy, that's what we want, right? But they had a vision for what that is, and that's really what I want to spend some time talking about, and then talking about how pornography really negatively impacts that. So first, I'm going to pass these out, and I don't know if there's a way to make these handouts available as part of the presentation. I don't have slides. I'm more comfortable kind of speaking from I don't know, just speaking to you instead of I get quite distracted from PowerPoints. But here's one handout that I want you to have kind of fixed in your mind a bit. And that is the idea that as people, we are made up of these different components. And if I was going to draw this and I was going to continue the metaphor correctly, what I would do is that actually in the interior lines here of this, that they would be dotted lines, because they obviously all kind of flow together, and all of these impact each other in some way. But throughout history, throughout human thought, this has really been the model of this is what it means to be a human. And if we take the wheel idea, what we recognize is that if we're strong in one of these areas, but really weak in others, then no one will confuse us for being healthy. No one will confuse us for being good. What we want is all of these areas to be working well, and us be committed to them. And then what will happen is that we will be growing in our goodness. So what does it mean to be healthy in all these areas? Well, physical health, first of all. We talk at our health center about the healthy triad, and we start with people almost no matter what reason they're coming in. The healthy triad of good sleep, of good nutrition that is well balanced and healthy, everything kind of in moderation. Your body needs carbs, and it needs proteins and healthy fats and all of this. And then you're also active and you're moving. And we have a very active student body on campus. There's gyms in every dorm. We have all kinds of activities they can engage in. And I would say we're probably one of the more active campuses in our country. So that's important, right? You know, that we take care of ourselves. One thing that is challenging is that sometimes caring for yourself and seeing that as a need is also tied to a person's worth. And what we recognize is that actually the less you care about yourself internally and the less you value yourself, the more likely you are to also not care about your physical appearance or what you eat and those kind of things. So again, that goes into some other areas here, but that's obviously really significant. Social self, you know, we are relational beings, and we always teach in classrooms that, you know, if you don't have healthy relationships, that you suffer, that we're better when we're in a community, that you have things even with children like failure to thrive syndrome, where we see that they're actually not, it's not good for them to be alone and to engage along those lines. To not be interacting with people. You know, one of my mentors always says that, you know, we all want to be loved, but we don't want to always be known. But those two things are connected. Because you'll never be fully loved unless you're fully known. It's kind of like how in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say, look, you're as sick as your secrets. The more secrets you have, the more unhealthy you are. So there's something about living in honest community where we're open and we're growing with others, and that's really important and healthy. What's the thing we do even in prisons to really up the ante if someone's getting in trouble? We put them in solitary confinement because we recognize being alone is one of the worst human things. So the opposite of that, we want healthy relationships. We want to understand things like, how do we repair relationships? How do we forgive, or how do we ask other people for forgiveness and deal with conflict and form good families? All those kind of things are part of social wellness. The behavioral self is this idea that I need to be able to not only make choices, but choices that are healthy, choices that are also congruent with just my values as a person. That's so significant. And so it's the idea. Carl Rogers, the famous psychotherapist, used this idea of congruence, and that happiness actually, that you're most happy when you have a set of values and that your life measures up to those values. Now, the values can't be perfection, right? They have to be reasonable and realistic, but that we have a way we want to live, and then our choices measure up with those things. A lot of times people, it's like this, and then people wonder why they're sad, or why they're anxious, or why they feel hopeless. And a lot of times it's because of that discrepancy. So we want people to be individuals who evaluate their behavior, who take stock of that, who slow themselves down enough to really evaluate their lives. Something else regarding Aristotle that we love talking about around here is the idea that the word character, the word that we use, or the Greek word for character, is actually this action word that means etching. It's like if you take a sharp object and you make a scrape across a table, it makes a line. But if you do it over and over and over and over, what happens is that becomes a permanent part and fixture of that thing. And that our choices do that. That the more we do something, the more it becomes part of us, which, if we're making good choices, is great, because then, good choices kind of beget good choices. If we're making challenging choices that are destructive to us, those things have become more and more difficult to break. Now, one thing I always said with alcoholics or people who were drug addicted regarding what I just said was, look, what all that means is that today is the best day to get clean and sober. Tomorrow will actually be a little bit more difficult if you keep drinking. Today, you can't go back and you can't change the past, right? But today is something that we can do and we can engage in. So that idea of etching is a really important part of the human person, that our choices do really affect us. Emotional self. What emotional health is, first, for a lot of people, is just recognizing that they have emotions. And what that means is teaching people to slow down. One of the curses of the smartphone is that I don't ever actually have to sit and actually have to be quiet. One of the things I find interesting in our current cultural landscape is, no matter who you talk to, left or right on the political spectrum, secular or religious, everyone is talking about the importance to be quiet, the importance to slow yourself down. And the reason is because we're so busy and we fill our mind with so many different things. I mean, when you look at the data on how many times you pick up your phone every day, or the average, there was a young woman I met with early in the semester, and her average on her phone every day was 7.5 hours. And I mean, she's awake for 17, and then she's in classes, and so what the challenging part of this is that we've got to be able to create space to say, how am I doing? That it's that simple, of just to be able to say, actually, how am I right now? And And what we're seeing increasingly numbers of in our counseling, and I think across the board, is this people that don't even know how to answer that question. And so we need to make people emotionally healthy. We also need to instruct them that emotional healthy isn't just emoting. I think culturally we've gotten that kind of messed up. That it also means developing a healthy way to deal with emotions. And that's that we're swimming upstream a little bit when it comes to that, because there is this big push for just emoting. And look, I'm a therapist. I talk with people about emotions all the time. But I was at a national conference for counselors a couple of years ago, and a woman stood up and said, she was PhD, and she said, we need to stop telling people to be resilient. And I said, wait, I don't think I've ever heard that sentence come out of anyone's mouth. And she said, we need to stop that, because what we're telling people is that change comes from inside, and it's the system that needs to change, not people, and not internally. And I think that is such a sad way to look at humans when you remove someone's agency. And we're talking about this a little bit more when I get to the spiritual piece, but when you remove a person's ability to respond to something, we don't want to do that. So emotional self is also understanding that I can deal with things, so that I don't actually have to turn to one of those compulsive things in the behavioral category: gambling, pornography, excessive masturbation, drinking, smartphones, whatever it might be. The mental self is, okay, what's my perspective on life? How do I view things that happen to me? And what's the filter it goes through? We want people to be based on truth, and not to over personalize things, or make things overly positive or overly negative. We don't want people to maximize things and make mountains out of molehills. We also don't want people to make molehills out of mountains either, right? We want people to be able to say, here's what's going on, here's what's happening. I can't tell the future. So if I go to the grocery store, I don't actually know if it's going to be awful. And we want them to be able to push themselves to be able to engage life and do it in a healthy way. But this is really about experience. What do I do when I experience fear, and how grounded in reality am I? And then lastly is the spiritual self. And so what this has to do with is ultimately that it's that part of me that, first of all, makes me pretty unique, because that what we're talking about in that part of a person's life or soul is, what do I care about? What really gives me meaning and purpose in life? How do I think I should live? And what's my legacy that I really want to leave? I think this came out of a book on character that I read recently, but the author said that too often as Americans, we live based on what he calls resume values. And what he says is, you build your life on your resume, and all you're doing is you're seeking your degrees, how much money you make, what kind of awards you're getting, and it's accomplishments and achievements, and that's it. And he said that can be dangerous. He said, but it would especially be sad if someone shows up to your funeral and what they did is they read your resume. And he switches and says, what we really need to live by is eulogy values. And eulogy values are, what are those wonderful things you want someone to stand up and say and eulogize you, which usually have to do with things like, what did you live your life for? How did you invest in other people and purpose? But getting kind of what I said at the emotional category, what the spiritual piece also is, it's that idea of when things are challenging, what am I going to do? how am I going to get through things? You know, Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, said that you can choose any attitude and any set of circumstances, even hard things. And it's the hard things that are actually going to form you more than anything else. And, you know, Viktor Frankl made those statements from inside a concentration camp as he observed how did different people relate to pain and suffering. And so you see, okay, this is what we're meant to be. And I know that's a really long, what it seems like an introduction, but I will say, I think that is so fundamental, because when we look at pornography and we start to go back to this, and we start to see that actually it starts to erode these things in a pretty significant way. With the physical self, what we often see with a prolonged exposure to pornography is that we see this part of the pie actually expand, and in that they only see someone as physical. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I get to social, but all that they see someone as is a body. And it's not someone with emotions. It's not someone with this, you know, with like a deep uniqueness about them. And so if it's just a body, then I don't really have to worry about hurting it. And what pornography does is it turns people into body parts that a person is just using for their own benefit and their own enjoyment. And so they can move on and not think about how that person might be hurt. But what pornography, again, getting back to those habits, what it does over and over and over is it really reestablishes that idea that this is just what a person, what a woman, what a whomever, what a man exists for is to really just be sexual. And so this part of the pie really expands when this happens. You can see then, and we there's a lot of studies and things out on the behavioral aspect of pornography and how it just is so incredibly addictive. And this is going to be more and more and more of the case. I've only been in the sexual addiction world for about 20 years, but when I got into it, there were no iPhones. There were no, the communities were like backdoor, and you had to, it was challenging to connect with them. Now all that has blown out, which is why we've seen an explosion in things like human trafficking, because there's more and more of a need for this. And what pornography does is it feeds on that. And so this is an important point to look and talk about the brain, and especially the brain from a standpoint of, you know, the prefrontal cortex, which is where we want people to be operating out of. It's goal-directed behavior. It's me thinking rationally and engaging things like that. And then you have these other parts, you know, you have your amygdala, which is just all instinct, and it's fear and it's lust and it's like reactions and responses. And in the middle of that, you have the nucleus accumbens, which is this reward center. And what pornography does is it feeds on those other two more primal instincts. And so that's why when someone looks at pornography, they need more and more, because what happens is that over time, just like an alcoholic, their body adjusts to 6 beers a day, and instead it's now it needs more. It needs 12 beers a day. And, you know, the brain does the same thing as it develops tolerance, and the old things that used to stimulate it no more. And look, pornography developers, they know all this, and they are really good at identifying all these things and how do we get more and more. And I'll tell you, go online and spend a little bit of time looking at things like virtual reality pornography, and you will be scared to death, because the way that they operate based on brain chemistry with visuals and now they're also they'll pull in your emotions, so they will register. Okay, how are you doing today? And this guy seems more sluggish because he's holding his head like this. That probably means that he's sad or he's upset. So they go out of their way to try to tie these emotional states then to actually engaging and getting them to engage pornography in this. These virtual reality headsets that will release scents during the experience, and not to get graphic, but like the inclusion of sex toys while they're doing it, so that you literally can just get everything that you want. And I read one article and actually a scientific magazine, they interviewed a virtual reality person, and he said people are going to like this will put an end to traditional sex, because people will get exactly what they want. They don't have to be disappointed again. And it's like, boy, this is a global crisis when we talk about these kind of things. And then you go to the social piece and you recognize that this is just eroding so many different things that are cultural. I want to show you something that is that we use a lot of times in with our when we do sexual assault talks on campus. And this is ultimately looking and saying, how is it that people bond? And it's from a book called Bonding. And ultimately, what it shows, I want to make sure I'm on the right one. Okay, I think I am now. Is just the normal way that these kind of things typically progress. And so, eye to body contact, you're attracted to someone. Eye to eye, now both people are attracted to each other. Then you engage people and you have conversations and you're asking questions and you're getting to know the person. Again, go back to the wheel, right? This is a person and there are different parts of who they are and they have interests, and are they like me or not? And you're starting to understand those kind of things, as opposed to like hookup culture that is, I'm at a party and I hook up with someone and I jump right down to the more sexual areas and I don't know this person and maybe I think I don't want to know them. And yet people are starved actually to want to engage people like this. Hand to hand, where there's some kind of physical contact that takes place. Hand to shoulder. And I love what he says when he talks about this in his book, is that it's a buddy position. So think about, you're side by side, right? You're still looking at the world, but you're side by side, and you're saying, okay, but we can't be wrapped up in each other yet. Got to have proper boundaries, and we got to give this time and those kind of things. And then hand to waist, which he calls the secret sharing position, because this is where you lean in and you tell people, okay, this is what I actually, I want to get to know you and I want to be intimate. And, we have let the porn world, I think, usurp the word intimacy. Where if I said, hey, I was really intimate with my wife last night, you would be like instantly like, okay, stop it, please, But really what I might mean is, wow, we went out to dinner and we had this really wonderful talk about the state of our marriage, set some really good goals, and we both shared some hard stuff. And it was really intimate. That's what we want people to experience. And that's what a lot of these are engaging in. And then, of course, there's healthy physical and sexual behavior to it. But unfortunately, what a lot of our young people see as relationship building are these kind of things. Social media does not help with this. Pornography completely erodes this and says, you don't need these things. They don't help. They're not important. And what happens is that then they ultimately have really unhealthy relationships. I mean, the interesting thing about the book that this came from, which boy, I'm at my desk. Last name is Joy. Is he set out just to say, how do people bond the best? And so people actually report better sexual focus when people aren't focusing on sexual behavior, because when they do connect sexually, they connect as people and not just a body. That is so important for us to express to our young people. Behavioral self, I talked about. Emotional self. What pornography does is that it hijacks that part of our brain. And again, going back to this part from a healthy standpoint, when we get to deal with our emotions, we grow. When a person goes to college and they're lonely, when you lose someone and you're grieving, when you have an upcoming presentation, maybe this is why I'm talking about this right now, and you're anxious, you grow. And what addictive behaviors do is that they keep people, there's a cheap out as we look at these kind of things, and they don't actually have to deal with their emotions. And when we do deal with our emotions, we grow. Intellectually, pornography really significantly erodes just a person in their in how they look and they view other people, how they perceive themselves, how they perceive others, how they think about the world around them. And what it does is that it makes it into a world that, again, is all about me and my desires and what I want. It's about manipulating things. And then there's the actual brain, brain changes that take place where ultimately someone isn't even firing the right way from a neurochemical standpoint with the tolerance and the desensitization. And and there's a hijacking that goes on in the brain. One of the things I came across when I was reading about virtual reality pornography is there are actually significant numbers of articles out there that say that this is a viable treatment for pedophiles. Because think of it, right? If AI makes a 12-year-old girl, and then a person has a headset on, and they're engaging in sexual activity with, is that wrong? It's not a real person. And the argument was, this is a viable way for them to act out, which is ridiculous on so many levels. But it's especially ridiculous from the mental level, because what we know, again, from the etching standpoint, is that the more they go over that, and that they're going, what we saw with sex offenders, I probably worked with 350 or 400 sex offenders, is that there was always a disturbance here before they acted out sexually in some way. It was always sexual addiction of some sort, very compulsive masturbation, looking at pornography, and that escalation is what was needed over time. And so that's that mental piece. And the physical piece, I'll just say this. I think why this starts to deteriorate is that ultimately a person stops caring about themselves. You don't have addicts who also feel good about themselves, because they are ultimately working against their own souls in that way. Go back to the spiritual self. One of the things I always tell our resident assistants when I talk to them is, you have to develop a philosophy of pain and suffering in life. And I know that sounds a bit morbid, but the truth of it is, they do, because they will engage and experience pain and suffering. And we want our young people to develop a philosophy of pain and suffering, because when they experience it, we don't want them to melt. We want them to be resilient. We want them to feel it, and we want them to know what to do with it and how to engage other people. So many parts of actually going around this circle, right? And so we want them to be able to say, I want to be a person who's able to deal with things, who's able to deal with problems. And pornography is a crutch to me of actually doing that. and I don't actually become the kind of person, the kind of whole person I want to be when I engage in pornography on an everyday basis and consistent basis. That's what we want our young people. There are some things that I think we do need to, I mean, this is frightening. Again, go read Virtual Reality, because what you'll see is that this is scary in lots of ways. When there was an article in the Daily Mail in UK, which is, I don't think, typically a conservative newspaper. They said that right now the virtual reality industry, this was 2021, is somewhere around $700 million a year. And she said by 2026, it will be the way that people engage in pornography. And that the industry will be somewhere around $19 billion a year. And that sounds absurd, except when you look at what are the most popular searches on the internet, you're talking about, of all searches, that 3 of them are blatant pornography sites. And then the others are also ways that people, like Instagram or Facebook, are also ways that people can engage pornography. You hear things like, okay, the pornography industry makes more than Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, and Netflix combined. And you think, okay, this is big, big money. And they have a vested interest for people to not view themselves like the people, like the good person on the screen, because they know it will erode that when people start to think these things. So that's why I think this is where this argument needs to be made. And I look forward to being at the conference. And if there are questions, if you weren't able to attend the breakout but have questions afterward, I'd be happy to engage in questions or things. I also, my email address is certainly available at the conference, and I'm pretty easy to find on the Hillsdale website. So thank you. I hope this was helpful for you, and anything that you have to add to this, I would be more than happy to hear. So take care. I hope you enjoy the conference.